My wife cheated on me for 6 months with some guy. I confronted her and now I'm torn between staying or... So, here I am on a Friday night, typing out my life on the internet because I have no idea where else to turn. My name's Ryan, and I thought my life was pretty solid. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 8 years. We've got 2 kids, twins actually, and I thought we were happy. I mean, we had the usual ups and downs, but I thought we'd weather the storms. We met in college, dated for a few years, and then got married when we were both 26. I work as a software engineer, and she's a dental hygienist. Life was good, or so I thought. Lately, though, Emily's been different, distant. We used to laugh a lot together. Now it feels like every conversation is forced. She's on her phone constantly, and I don't know who she's texting. She goes out with her girls a lot more than she used to, and when I ask her about it, she gets defensive. You know how it is. You get that gut feeling that something isn't right, but you push it down because you don't want to believe it. I tried to ignore the signs. I figured maybe we were just going through a rough patch, and things would get better. But then, she started coming home late from work more often. The excuses were always the same. Had to stay late at the office, or grab drinks with the girls. Except last week, I saw one of her friends at the grocery store and casually mentioned how nice it must have been for Emily to hang out with them after work. Her friend gave me this confused look and said, "Oh, we haven't gone out in weeks." And that's when I knew. That moment in the grocery store hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to keep it cool, but inside, my mind was spinning. On the drive home, every little thing that had seemed off suddenly clicked into place. All those nights she was working late or grabbing drinks. None of it added up anymore. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. Who would? I didn't confront her right away. I figured if I just came at her with "Are you cheating?" she'd deny it or make me feel like I was overreacting. So I decided I needed proof. That night, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone, hoping I'd find something innocent to calm my fears. But that's when I noticed it. Her messages were locked behind a password. That had never been the case before. Red flag, right? I wanted to ask her about it, but I knew she'd just come up with some excuse. Still, I wasn't ready to believe the worst. Then last night, she left her phone on the counter while she was putting the kids to bed. It buzzed. I knew I shouldn't, but I grabbed it. There was a message from someone named Brandon. It said, "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." My heart sank. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was real. I just stared at the screen, completely numb, not ready to accept what was right in front of me. But I couldn't deny it any longer. My wife was cheating on me. I stood there, staring at that message, feeling like my whole world had just collapsed. Last night was amazing. There was no way to misinterpret that. My mind was racing, my stomach in knots. I wanted to scream, to throw her phone across the room, but instead I just stood frozen, trying to process it. I quickly put the phone back on the counter, exactly where she left it, and sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't want her to know that I'd seen anything yet, not until I could figure out what to do. My head was spinning with a million questions. How long had this been going on? Who the hell was Brandon? How could she do this to me, to our family? When Emily came back downstairs, she didn't seem any different. She smiled at me, asked if I was okay, and went about her evening like nothing had happened, like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back with some other guy. I just stared at her, barely able to respond, my mind still stuck on that text. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew if I didn't have more proof, she'd just deny it or make up some story. I needed to know more, how long this had been going on, how serious it was. So I kept quiet, for now, but the anger was building up inside me, and I knew I couldn't hold it in for much longer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there next to Emily, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. I couldn't shake the image of her with someone else. Couldn't stop hearing that message over and over again in my mind. She slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I felt like I was losing my mind. At around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and went downstairs to sit on the couch. My thoughts were spiraling. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face? Every time she'd gone out with her friends. Was it really him? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But I wasn't just angry. I was hurt. I mean, we'd built a life together, shared everything. How could she throw it all away like this? I needed to do something, anything to get answers. The next morning, while she was still asleep, I took her phone again. This time, I wasn't just looking for texts. I went through her photos, her call log, even her emails. And then I found it, a hidden folder in her gallery. It was full of pictures, selfies of her in lingerie, in what looked like a hotel room. And worse, there were pictures of her with Brandon, him smiling, with his arm wrapped around her like they were a happy couple. My heart sank all over again. This wasn't some mistake or a one-time thing. This was an affair, and it had been going on for a while. Seeing those photos felt like a punch to the gut. There she was, posing in lingerie for some other man, smiling like everything was fine. Pictures of them together, arms around each other, looking way too comfortable. It wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper, something real, and I'd been completely in the dark. My chest felt tight, anger mixing with hurt. I couldn't believe how far it had gone, how much she had hidden from me. The woman I thought I knew, the one I shared a life with, was living a lie. I wanted to confront her, to shout, but the shock left me frozen for a moment. I went upstairs, heart pounding, and stood over her as she slept. The sight of her lying there, peaceful, like nothing was wrong, made my blood boil. I wasn't going to hold it in any longer. I had seen enough. I woke her up, and when she stirred, the guilt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. This was real. My marriage wasn't. The guilt in her eyes when she woke up said it all. She didn't even try to lie or come up with some half-hearted excuse. She just sat there, wide-eyed and frozen, like she had no idea what to do or say. In that moment, I didn't need an explanation. The pictures, the texts, they were enough. I already knew more than I ever wanted to. I left the room before I could explode. The sight of her, after everything I had seen, was too much. I needed space, needed to think. My chest was tight with anger and confusion, but more than that, I was crushed. The betrayal hit me harder than I ever thought possible. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for ignoring all the signs that had been right in front of me. I went downstairs and sat on the couch, head in my hands. My mind was racing. How long had she been lying to me? How many nights had she come home and acted like everything was fine, like we were still a team, while she was sneaking off to be with him? It wasn't just the cheating that broke me. It was the deception, the fact that she could look me in the eyes, share a life with me, and still lie so easily. The sadness started to creep in, swallowing up the anger. The weight of everything hit me all at once. Everything we had, the house, the kids, the years we spent building a life together, it all felt tainted now. I wasn't just losing her. I was losing the life I thought we had. The realization that everything had changed, that nothing would be the same, hit me harder than any punch ever could. I just sat there, staring blankly into space, wondering where the hell I went from here. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at nothing, trying to wrap my head around what I just uncovered. The house was quiet, too quiet. Upstairs, I could hear the faint sound of movement. Emily probably pacing around, trying to figure out what to say, how to fix this. But I didn't want to hear it. No excuse, no apology could undo what she'd done. Eventually, she came downstairs, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. She stood in the doorway for a moment, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to say something, anything. But what was there to say? The damage was done. She finally spoke, her voice small and shaky, asking me if we could talk. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know if I even wanted to hear her voice after everything I had just found out. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand answers. But another part of me didn't want to hear any more lies. I didn't trust a word that would come out of her mouth at this point. After what felt like an eternity, I looked up at her. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw her as a stranger. This wasn't the woman I had married, the mother of my kids. This was someone else. Someone capable of betrayal on a level I never thought I'd have to face. All I could do was shake my head. I didn't even have the energy to yell. I just felt empty. She stood there, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't have it in me. The silence between us felt like a canyon. Finally, she broke the tension, her voice trembling as she tried to explain. She said she'd made a mistake, that it wasn't what it looked like, that it didn't mean anything. But how could she possibly think it didn't mean anything? This wasn't some harmless flirtation. This was a full-blown affair, something she'd hidden from me for who knows how long. My mind was spinning, trying to grasp how the person I thought I knew better than anyone could do something like this and then stand there, acting like it was some sort of slip-up. I finally looked up at her, the words spilling out before I could stop them. A mistake? I said, my voice low but sharp. You've been sneaking around, lying to me for God knows how long, and you think you can call it a mistake? Who is he? Emily, how long has this been going on? Her face went pale, and I could see she wasn't prepared for that. She stammered, trying to gather her thoughts, but it was too late. I wasn't interested in half-hearted excuses. I wanted the truth, and the more she fumbled her words, the angrier I became. She finally admitted it had been happening for months. Months. My stomach turned as the reality of it all hit me again. While I was here, taking care of our kids, trusting her. She was off with someone else, building some kind of twisted fantasy. The anger came back full force, but this time it was mixed with something worse. Pain. The kind that cuts deep and doesn't let go. Hearing her admit that it had been going on for months was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just some mistake. This was deliberate. Every lie she told, every night she was with him instead of us, was calculated. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for believing in the life we had. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I got up and walked past her, ignoring the tears that had started to well up in her eyes. I wasn't ready for her emotions. I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not now. Not after everything I had just heard. I went into the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. I could hear her following me, trying to say something, trying to explain, but I didn't care anymore. She had months to tell me the truth, and she didn't. She let it keep going, lying every single day, coming home to our family like everything was normal. She stood in the doorway again, pleading now, her voice breaking. She said she was sorry, that it hadn't meant anything, that she never wanted to hurt me or the kids. But that's the thing about betrayal. It's not just about intent. The damage is done, whether she meant it or not. She tore apart everything we'd built together. I finally turned to face her, my voice quieter this time, but full of anger. It didn't mean anything? Then why did you keep doing it? Why didn't you stop, Emily? You had every chance to come clean, to end this, and you didn't. So don't stand there and tell me it didn't mean anything, because it sure as hell meant something to me. She broke down, sobbing, but it didn't move me. All I felt was a cold realization that the woman I had loved, the one I had built a life with, had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who was willing to destroy everything. Watching her break down in front of me should have stirred something in me. Sympathy, compassion, anything, but it didn't. I just stood there, numb. Her tears couldn't undo the damage she'd caused. And honestly, I didn't even believe she was crying for me. She was crying because she got caught. She kept repeating that she was sorry, that she didn't mean to hurt me or the kids, that she didn't know how things had gotten so out of control. But I wasn't buying it. Affairs don't just happen. You don't accidentally meet someone, sneak around for months, and then suddenly wake up surprised by your own actions. I told her that. I said, This wasn't some mistake, Emily. You made choices over and over again. You chose to lie to me, to betray me, and now you're standing here trying to fix it with a bunch of empty apologies? It's too late for that. Her face crumpled, but I couldn't stop. The floodgates were open now. I had too much to say, too much anger to let out. I started pacing, my voice getting louder with every word. While I was here, taking care of our kids, you were out with him, living some secret life. How could you look me in the eye every day, knowing what you were doing? She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, tears running down her face, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what was happening. But I couldn't believe what was happening either. My entire marriage felt like a lie, and I wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. The weight of it all came crashing down on me. I stopped pacing and sat down at the kitchen table, exhausted. I didn't know what to do, what to say next. All I knew was that everything had changed, and there was no going back. Sitting there at the kitchen table, the weight of everything started to hit me all at once. The life we had built, the trust, the future I thought we had, it was all shattered. I couldn't even look at her. The silence between us was suffocating. She stood there, crying quietly, but I was too drained to care. I felt like a shell of myself, hollowed out by the betrayal. Emily kept whispering through her sobs, "Please, Jake, we can work through this. I'll do anything. Please don't give up on us." But her words just bounced off me. How do you work through something like this? How do you come back from months of lies, of betrayal? I wasn't even sure I could look at her without thinking of him, of all the nights she spent with him while I was here, being a husband and father. I needed space, a chance to think. I pushed myself up from the table, feeling the exhaustion in every part of my body. "I need to get out of here," I muttered, barely able to get the words out. I couldn't stay in that house, in the same room as her, not right now. It was too much. She panicked, her voice breaking again. "Please, Jake, don't leave. We can talk. We can fix this." Her words were desperate, but I didn't turn back. There was nothing left to say, not now. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door, leaving her standing there crying. I got into my car and just drove. No destination, no plan, just driving to clear my head, to get away from everything. The quiet hum of the engine was the only thing that felt normal. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere was better than being there, in that house, suffocating under the weight of what my life had become. I drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a couple. The road stretched out in front of me, a blur of headlights and asphalt, but I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I just needed to escape, to outrun the chaos that had taken over my life. But no matter how far I drove, the thoughts followed. There was no escaping the reality that my marriage had crumbled in front of me. My mind kept replaying everything. How Emily had lied to my face, how she acted like everything was fine while she was sneaking around with him. It wasn't just about the cheating. It was a complete destruction of the trust we'd built over the years. How could I ever look at her the same way again? Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot, put the car in park, and just sat there, staring out into the darkness. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal, it all hit me at once, like a tidal wave. I wanted to scream, to punch something, but instead, I just sat there, the weight of it all pressing down on me. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't picture a future with her anymore, not after what I'd seen. But the thought of tearing our family apart, of what this would do to the kids, made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about me and Emily. It was about the life we'd built for our children, the family we had promised to protect. And now, it felt like all of that was on the verge of collapsing, all because of her choices. Sitting there in the dark, I realized I had a decision to make. Either I could try to pick up the pieces of what was left of our marriage, or I could walk away. Neither option felt right, but doing nothing wasn't an option either. I couldn't just pretend this didn't happen. Something had to change. As I sat there in the dark, staring at the empty parking lot, I realized just how heavy the decision was. Do I try to fix something that feels completely broken? Do I walk away and start over, knowing it will tear everything apart? The weight of it all crushed me. I thought about the kids. They were still so young, still innocent. They had no idea what was happening, no clue that their world was on the verge of being flipped upside down. The idea of splitting up, of telling them that their mom and dad weren't going to be together anymore, made me feel sick. But staying in a marriage where trust was shattered felt impossible too. I knew I couldn't make a decision like this out of anger, though. The fury that had consumed me was still there, burning under the surface, but it was starting to cool, replaced by this deep sadness. I never imagined myself in this position. I always thought we were one of the solid couples, the ones who'd make it through anything. But now, I was questioning everything. Was our entire marriage a lie? Was this affair just the tip of the iceberg? Or was it a sign that we'd been drifting apart long before I noticed? I took a deep breath and tried to think about what I really wanted. Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever look at her without seeing him, without thinking of the betrayal? And if I did leave, would I be okay with that? Would the kids be okay? The answers didn't come. All I knew was that nothing was going to be the same again. Whether we stayed together or not, our marriage, as I had known it, was over. There was no going back to what we had. The trust was gone. Now it was just a matter of figuring out what came next. The silence in the car grew heavier, like the calm before a storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever decision I made next would change my life forever. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to keep my emotions in check, but the truth was, I was barely holding it together. The weight of the situation, of what had happened, was pressing down on me harder than ever. I thought back to all the moments we'd shared. Holidays with the kids, late-night talks, the life we'd built over the years. It all felt so distant now, like it belonged to a different version of us, a version that no longer existed. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had become someone I didn't recognize. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no going back to the way things were. Not after what she had done, but I couldn't shake the anger that was bubbling up again, slowly rising to the surface. It wasn't just what she did. It was the fact that she had stood there, looked me in the eyes, and lied to me for months. She had created this entire facade, playing the role of the loving wife, while sneaking off to be with him. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, the sudden burst of anger shocking even me. How could she do this? How could she think this was something we could just work through? My mind raced with images of her and Brandon, and the rage inside me started to grow again, threatening to overwhelm everything else. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. There was still more to say, more to confront, and I wasn't ready to let her off the hook, not by a long shot. I sat there for a few more minutes, letting the anger simmer just below the surface. My breathing was heavy, my hands still gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. But deep down, I knew I couldn't just sit in that car forever. I had to face this head on. I had to face her. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, debating whether I should call her or just go back home. What would I even say? Every part of me wanted answers, but I also didn't want to hear any more lies. Still, the thought of her sitting in that house, probably thinking I'd run off and left things unresolved, fueled the anger all over again. No! This wasn't going to end with me driving away. She needed to know how deep this betrayal cut. I needed her to understand the destruction she'd caused. I wasn't going to let her off easy. I shoved the keys into the ignition and started driving back, every mile filled with growing tension. My mind was a storm of thoughts. What would I say? How would she react? Could I even handle what was coming next? The questions circled around my head, tightening the knot in my chest. As I pulled up to the house, I saw the light still on. She was waiting for me. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears as I stepped out of the car. This time, there would be no holding back. I was going to get the truth, no matter how ugly it was. As I stood outside the house, staring at the warm glow of the lights inside, my heart raced. My mind was a mess of anger and anticipation, the tension building with every step I took toward the front door. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was about to happen, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't leave this unfinished. Not tonight. I opened the door and stepped inside, the silence of the house pressing down on me. The air felt thick, heavy with everything unsaid. Emily was sitting on the couch, her face pale, eyes red and swollen from crying. The sight of her sitting there, broken and fragile, should have softened me, but it didn't. Not anymore. She looked up when she heard me enter, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Jake," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know if you were coming back." I ignored her words, my chest tightening as I walked further into the room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and controlled. I wasn't yelling, but the anger behind my words was unmistakable. She nodded, tears forming again, but I wasn't here to listen to her cry. I wanted answers. I needed to hear it from her. The truth. No more half-hearted apologies or excuses. "How long, Emily?" I asked, standing a few feet away, my hands clenched in the fists at my sides. "How long have you been seeing him?" She looked down, her hands shaking in her lap. For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer, but then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. 6 months. 6 months. My stomach twisted at the words. 6 months of lies. 6 months of betrayal. I felt the anger rise again, sharper this time. 6 months. The number hit me like a hammer, each syllable echoing in my head. For 6 months, she had been lying to me, living a double life while pretending everything was fine at home. I could barely comprehend it. My jaw tightened as I fought to keep my voice steady. 6 months. I repeated, my voice colder now, almost disbelieving. How could you look me in the eyes every day and lie? How could you come home to our kids, to me, after being with him? Emily wiped at her tears, but I didn't care anymore. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. It got out of control. I know I messed up, Jake, but I never wanted to hurt you." Her words felt hollow, as if she didn't fully understand the damage she had caused. "You never wanted to hurt me?" I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "Emily, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything. You threw away our marriage, our family. For what? For him." She flinched at my words, and I could see the guilt washing over her. But it wasn't enough. I needed more than her regret. I needed the truth. "Why?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Why him? Why did you keep going back? Was I not enough for you?" Her lips trembled, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. Then she finally said, "It wasn't about you, Jake. It was about me. I got lost in it, in the attention, in feeling wanted. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was my own weakness." Weakness. The word hung in the air between us, but it didn't make me feel any better. It just made the betrayal sting even more. This wasn't a mistake. This was something she had chosen, over and over again, and now it was my life that was left in ruins because of it. Her words stung, and the room felt smaller, tighter. "It wasn't about you." How many times had I heard people use that line in stories about cheating, as if it made the betrayal any easier to swallow? But this wasn't some distant story. It was my life unraveling before me, and it was about me, about us, about the family we had built. "Your weakness." I shot back, my voice filled with disbelief. 6 months, Emily. You don't get to blame this on some momentary lapse or feeling wanted. You had choices every single day. Every time you walked out that door, every time you texted him, you chose him over me, over our kids. That wasn't weakness. That was a decision. She sobbed harder, but her tears weren't doing anything to soften the rage building inside me. I couldn't help but imagine all the nights she'd come home late, the fake smiles, the lies about working late or seeing friends. It was all replaying in my head now, like some twisted movie where I was the only one who didn't know the ending. "I know," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I know I made the wrong choices, Jake. I'm so sorry." She reached out toward me, but I took a step back, my hands clenched at my sides. "Sorry doesn't change anything," I said, my voice hard. "Sorry doesn't fix this. You took everything we had, everything we built together, and tore it apart. And for what? Some fleeting feeling of attention?" She didn't have an answer, and that silence was louder than any word she could have said. I stood there, looking at her, the woman I had once trusted with everything, and all I saw was the wreckage of our life scattered around us. The trust, the love, it was all gone. The worst part was I didn't know if there was any way to recover from it. The silence between us was unbearable. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down at the wreckage of everything we had, knowing there was no way to put it back together. Emily's tears, her regret, none of it could erase what she had done. My mind kept spinning, trying to figure out if there was even a way forward. But every time I thought about it, all I saw was betrayal. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, my voice flat, drained of all emotion. "The person I loved, the person I thought I knew, she's gone. How do you expect me to trust you again, to ever look at you the same way?" Emily looked up at me, her face a mess of guilt and regret. "Jake, I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or even to trust me, but I'll do anything, to fix this. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words, but they didn't touch me. "You can't make this right, Emily. You can't undo the months of lies, the nights you chose them over your family. You've broken something that doesn't get fixed with an apology or promises to change." I turned away, pacing the room, my mind racing with thoughts of what this would mean for the future. The kids, the life we had built together, all of it felt tainted now, poisoned by her actions. How was I supposed to move forward, knowing this was what she was capable of? How could I ever feel secure in this marriage again? I stopped pacing, standing in the middle of the room, torn between the life we had built and the devastation she had caused. I knew one thing for certain. Nothing was going to be the same again. I couldn't imagine forgiving her, but walking away meant tearing our family apart. The weight of that decision pressed down on me, and I could feel myself sinking under it. There was no easy answer. The weight of it all pressed down harder as I stood there, the reality of what came next sinking in. There was no simple fix, no way to rewind and undo the damage. My mind kept flipping between two impossible choices: stay and try to rebuild a life that felt shattered beyond repair, or leave and tear apart the only family my kids had ever known. I looked at Emily, still sitting on the couch, broken and pleading. I could see that she was desperate, willing to do whatever it took to fix what she had destroyed. But the problem was, I didn't know if I had anything left to give her. Trust was gone, and without it, what was left? But then I thought about the kids. How would this affect them? They had no idea what was happening. To them, everything was normal. Tearing apart our family would rip their world in half. And I couldn't bear the thought of them suffering because of what she had done. I didn't want to see them hurt, didn't want them to grow up in a broken home. My anger was still there, the betrayal still fresh. But in that moment, I realized that whatever decision I made wouldn't be just for me. It would be for them. And maybe that was what made it harder to leave. The life we had built wasn't perfect anymore, but it was still their life, and I wasn't sure I could take that away from them. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my body not disappearing, but dulling just enough for me to speak. I don't know if I could ever trust you again," I said quietly, almost to myself. "But for the kids, I'm willing to try. I'll stay, for now, but don't mistake this for forgiveness. It's not. You have to earn that." Emily's face crumbled, and she nodded quickly, as if she couldn't believe I was still standing there. "I'll do whatever it takes, Jake. I swear, I'll make this right. I didn't respond. I didn't believe it would ever be right again. But for now, I'd stay for the kids, for the life we'd built. The road ahead would be long, full of doubt and pain. But leaving wasn't an option I was ready to take just yet.